On today's episode, we are going to be talking about stress reduction techniques. I'm going to share with you the specific things that I've been doing over the past year that I believe has made a big difference in managing my own stress levels. I will talk with you about how I found out what my stress levels really were in my body, things that I've done to decrease those stress levels, evidence-based techniques and tools is what I will be talking about. But specifically, I will be sharing the anecdotal data from my own experience with what it was like to implement these and how it has subjectively impacted me and my stress levels. I hope that you get some takeaways from this as well of things that you can do and implement in your own life that will help decrease your stress levels as well. Let's dive into today's episode. First, let's talk about what stress is. When we say that we feel stressed, it is because there is a mechanism occurring in our body that is increasing cortisol, and that cortisol is not leaving our body. And it's that increase in cortisol that causes stress. Stress is cortisol is the stress hormone, and it has impacts on several areas of our body. Now, cortisol in and of itself is not a bad thing. Our bodies need to have cortisol in several different ways. One of those being that when we wake up in the morning, it is cortisol that needs to be at its highest early in the morning because that is what wakes us up, gets us out of bed, and gets us moving. Cortisol in life or death situations allows us to flee from things that are looking to attack us, right? This is the ideal way that cortisol performs in our body. It's how we were built. It serves a good purpose for us. But in the modern day and age, cortisol tends to be, in many people, chronically elevated. And that's when we begin to see health problems. I have heard on other podcasts and other doctors, even on several different medical websites, that it's actually stress that is the number one cause of disease, because that heightened stress leads to just this chronic inflammation, and your body can't heal and do the things that it needs to do when you are chronically stressed out. What are the things in our current culture that are stressing us out? Well, we have devices everywhere that we didn't have before that are always seeking for our attention. We just engross ourselves into screens and into email and into work. We're now able to work until late hours of the night, whereas historically there were set times that people would work. And as they would work, they would also typically be doing something that was moving their body, that was getting their heart rate up, that was a little bit more active than many of us do nowadays. And so they were able to better handle the demands of the day through the activity of their body to help release some of that stress and release some of that tension. Now, I am by no means an expert in stress, nor am I a doctor that deals with hormone levels such as cortisol, but these are things that I've been learning through my own research and through my own experience with having stress levels that have been debilitating at times. Back in 2018 timeframe, I did something called a Dutch test, DUTCH. I'm not a sponsor of it. I'm not necessarily even an advocate of it. It worked well for me. You can do your own research and see if it's something that you want to find a provider to see if you want to do a Dutch test. But what it is it is a hormone-based test. They have one for men and they have one for women. For women, they encourage you, well, actually, you have to take the test on a certain day of your menstrual cycle. It's about the 14th or 15th day of your menstrual cycle. And it is a 24-hour test. So it's a urine-based test. There's several different strips that you urinate on over a 24-hour period at certain time frames in that period. And it starts to show you a trajectory of what your hormones are doing in that period of time. So for me, one of the biggest takeaways that I had when I did that test, and I will say I was in an incredibly stressful season and period of my life. I was having panic attacks often. I was having incredibly bad insomnia and got to a point where I really felt like there was something bad wrong with me. That's a Southern phrase. There was something bad wrong. And so I remember going to my doctor and just falling apart in the doctor's office and said, I think I need an antidepressant. Like I cannot function like this anymore. My stress was through the roof. We ended up doing this Dutch test. And in it, I found that I actually have had at that point, incredibly elevated amounts of metabolized cortisol. I mean, it couldn't have gotten any higher on the chart. And what is metabolized cortisol? Well, basically, as we said earlier in the episode, cortisol is the reaction in our body of stress levels. So the cortisol rises, it leads to stress levels. That cortisol is a hormone. It needs to be cleared out of the body. And when it's not cleared out of the body, it continues to pile up. The way that my doctor described it to me was it's kind of like your body is taking the trash out, the trash being the cortisol, but the garbage man isn't coming to pick it up. So there's just this overflow of cortisol just racked up inside of your body. And I remember asking him, like, great, okay, now that we know, what pill do I need to take, or what do I need to do to get rid of this cortisol? And he said, you need a lifestyle change. You need to stop working so much. You need to start taking better care of your body and your sleep, and you need to actually do things to relax. Now, some of you may have guessed, but I am quite a type A personality. I don't wear this with a badge of honor by any stretch of the imagination, because it has led to a lot of mental frustrations as well as physical frustrations that have happened in my body from pushing it too hard, too much. And this was one of those times. I was so stressed out and my body was beginning to break down. And I was starting to have other physical ramifications of what that stress was doing to my body as well. I wish I could say that I took it seriously then and immediately began to do things to turn it around. The truth of the matter is I didn't. In fact, it was just a year after that we brought our kids home from India, and my stress levels got even higher because for the first time, we went from a family of 2 to a family of 4, literally overnight. And those first 4 months, especially when I was on maternity leave, I mean, I remember, well, before I even get to that, the first 2 weeks we were in India and had our kids with us, I literally slept 3 hours a night for 2 weeks. I was just so not on edge, but all of my senses were heightened. And I remember that was when my son was having night terrors. He would wake up in the middle of the night in the hotel room, just shrieking in terror, not knowing where he was or what was going on. And so I would pick him up and hold him. He would push me away, but I would just keep holding him and comforting him until he would finally begin to release his little body into my arms and begin to trust me. And that's pretty much how it was for the first 3 to 4 months. It wasn't the night terrors every night, but it was a constant looking out for them, making sure that we were bonding and just dealing with that transition into motherhood with a 4 and a 2-year-old. And I was eating literally everything. I gained probably 10 pounds in that 4 months because that's how I was dealing with my stress. It wasn't really until we began to slow our lives down in 2020 and things had to change that I really began to be able to focus on decreasing my stress levels and dealing with my insomnia. So really in the past year, maybe the past 2 years, but especially in the past year, is really where I felt like I have been able to find a good routine. And I've tried several different things over the past 3 years, 4 years to decrease my stress levels. And now I feel like I am finally in a good spot. So I want to share with you the things that I've been doing, how my stress levels have changed objectively. I have not gone and had another Dutch test done yet, but just from how I feel, I believe that those levels of my metabolized cortisol would be lower than they were. I'm not having panic attacks. I rarely have insomnia. And if there is a night that I don't get good sleep, I know how to handle it. I know how to calm my body back down and be able to put it back to bed. So I've found techniques that have worked for me. I've gotten 100 times better at disconnecting from work and not being such a workaholic. And I won't talk about this in this episode, but I've even learned how to change how I mentally see myself so that I don't find my worth in what I do. Here's what I have done to decrease my stress levels that have actually worked and have stayed working for over the past year. The first thing that I have done is I have absolutely made sleep a priority. When I say I've made sleep a priority, what I mean is nothing interferes with my sleep. There may be a couple of nights in a year where I intentionally choose to stay up past my bedtime. And if I'm intentionally choosing that, it's likely only because I'm choosing socializing and camaraderie and relationship over sleep, which definitely has its place and definitely has its own health benefits that need to be focused on. And also its own stress reducing properties. But that's typically if I'm at a business conference that I'm going to, reconnecting with friends I haven't seen in a long time, or maybe my husband and I are doing something like going to a concert for our date night, and that concert is going to last late. Hey, I know that's going to happen. I'll prepare for it. I'll know that the next day is not going to be as great as it could be, but that's never going to be my normal. We protect our bedtime. And I say we because my husband has gotten on board with this as well. We're doing this together. So around 7 p.m., I stop eating because I know that my body is going to sleep best when I have had 2 hours to digest my food. So I really try and stop eating around 7. Around 8, we're putting our kids to bed because that's the stage of life they're in right now. We're able to do that, but we're putting the kids to bed and we begin dimming all of the lights in our house. That's also typically when I put my phone up, I put my Apple Watch up, and I try and really disconnect from screens, like those kinds of screens. After 5 p.m., I'm rarely on my computer. I will say that. I've made a really good transition in the past year of stopping work at about 5 p.m. and not really accepting things. There have been times where I've done different teachings or webinars or things after 5 p.m. and it always wrecks my sleep. So I've really made it intentional to not do that and to really focus on shutting all the work and all of the revving up of my brain that happens in the workday at 5 p.m. So at 8 p.m., we're shutting down lights. We're beginning to just decompress. I take a supplement. Again, check with your doctor. I am not a physician, or your physician. So check with your licensed healthcare provider about any of these supplements. Everything I'm sharing here is just an idea that has worked for me. You need to do your own research. I take a supplement called Natural Calm. It is a magnesium supplement, which helps to just calm down the nervous system. It also helps some with digestion if that's an issue that you have. And so it really helps to calm me down, helps me to begin to transition into sleep, which we go to sleep at about 9:30. So at 8 o'clock, we do have our TV on. That's my husband's time to connect with each other for a little bit before turning on some of our favorite shows and then just beginning to allow our brains to transition more into story than to-do lists. So that's how we have found that works for us. And then as soon as I start getting tired, I don't try and stay up to really finish a show or anything like that. That's when we transition into the bedroom. And I know I've done podcasts on this in the past. You'll have to go listen to some of the past ones where I talk about just a lot of different things about sleep. But we are consistent about having a cool room that we sleep in. I have a chili pad that keeps my mattress at about 62 degrees, which really helps me to stay asleep through the night because I used to wake up just feeling hot. And so that has helped a lot. And I use a weighted blanket. So I use like a 25-pound weighted blanket, which really helps me to sleep. And then of course I've gone through quite the process, but I finally found a pillow. It's a down pillow that has really helped with my neck problems when I sleep. So I've just become fanatical about my sleep. Now, the other side of that is I'm fanatical about my wake up because we know that a good night's sleep starts the minute you wake up. Like I said, our cortisol is what increases first thing in the morning. It's what prompts us to wake up and get out of bed. And so we want to make sure that when we get up, we're doing things that help to set that circadian rhythm, that's the moment we're waking up. And it actually begins a set of mechanisms in our body that just, it's like a domino effect of allowing the melatonin to produce later in the evening based on things that we do in the morning. One of those things is getting sunlight on your body. So going outside, whether it's cloudy or sunshiny, going for a walk, 5-10 minutes can even help. Now, being outside is way better than being inside because the lumens that come from the sun are filtered through windows. And so it's not as strong inside of the house. And it can't even be replicated really especially with lights. And I know that they have, vitamin D lights and things like that that you can have in your house. Sometimes those are expensive. The thing I do is I just go outside and take a walk or go for maybe a jog or something like that to just wake my body up and feel refreshed. I don't have caffeine first thing that I wake up in the morning. It's best to use caffeine 90 minutes to 2 hours after waking up in the morning. And the reason is because we have these receptors in our brain called adenosine receptors. And basically, caffeine goes into these adenosine receptors and blocks the molecules that go into it. And it's the molecules that go into the adenosine receptors that make us tired throughout the day. And so there's still some of those tired molecules in those adenosine receptors when we wake up in the morning. And so getting up, getting moving, doing some things and allowing those to completely flesh out is the best thing to do. And then having some caffeine after that, which can help because you've released the adenosine that's in there. It doesn't kind of help or mess up the buildup for the next night that's coming. Anyway, that's way too in the details. I'm just telling you exactly what I do. So I go out and I have my morning walk. I have my quiet time. I have my Bible reading. I really try and be intentional about my day to set my morning up, especially the first hour and a half or just the first hour, to set that time up to where it's not going to stress me out first thing in the morning. Not checking email, not checking the news, heaven forbid, not doing something that's just going to stress me out first thing in the morning, like wake up late and then have to rush to get to somewhere. I really am intentional about my morning time because I know it sets up the mood for the rest of my day. I don't want to start my day stressed. I want to start it calm and grounded. Now, how does this apply to you? I know several of you are stay-at-home parents or maybe working professionals that don't have control of your own schedule on a day-to-day basis, but I would really challenge you to look for the areas that you do have control over and make those a priority for your own mental health and stress levels. I know especially a lot of stay-at-home parents will say, but my kids wake up at 6 a.m., 5 a.m., they're in my bed. I don't have time for me. Figure out a way to do something without compromising sleep. You may be thinking this sounds like you're asking for the lottery to be won. It's absolutely impossible. Get creative. Maybe it's not the first thing you do when you wake up that you're, out the door and in the sun, but maybe you go outside with the kids for 10 minutes. Maybe you have your morning cup of water before you drink some coffee out there while the kids are playing out in the sun. You're out there too. Or maybe you find a local gym, even a recreational center that's managed by the county. They typically tend to be a little more affordable and tend to have free childcare. And do that. Like go to the gym, put your kids in childcare, walk outside around the building, find a way to do the things that are going to decrease your stress levels. Set that alarm, wake up in time so that you don't have to rush to get out the door. And guess what? A lot of times you just have to do the backwards math there and say, if I want to really be well rested and not have to rush in my mornings, then maybe I need to go to bed at 9 a.m., 9 p.m. Maybe I need to go to bed at 9 p.m. You may be thinking, but I'm going to bed at midnight now. Well, you can slowly, in 15-minute increments, work your schedule back to where you can be getting more sleep by going to bed earlier and waking up without being frazzled. Find what it is for you. I'm just telling you what's worked for me. But if you take that concept of how do I decrease the stress in my morning and set a positive intention and focus for my day and realize that you are the one in control of that. I don't care how many kids are running into your bed at 5 a.m. You can find a way to decrease your stress throughout your day and especially in your morning. And it's going to look different for you than it looks for me because we have different lives. We have different support systems. But when we pull on those support systems, when we communicate with others what we need, when we ask others for help, we can tend to find solutions that work for this. Okay, so sleep is important. My morning routine, very important. The caffeine, we talked about a little bit. I have moved to a half calf model in my life. So I'm not drinking fully caffeinated things. I love my coffee routine. I love it. I do a French press. I love the process of grinding my beans and making coffee. It's something I'm unwilling to give up. And so on the flip side of that, I know that coffee can tend to be an anxiety producer for me. It can also tend to be a stress reducer because if I haven't had my morning cup of coffee yet, then I can feel a little on edge, and just having that first sip can reduce my stress. But if I have too much caffeine, it actually works in the opposite way, and it actually begins to increase my anxiety and therefore increase my stress. So I have found a good medium there by moving to half calf. I buy a bag of decaffeinated beans and a bag of caffeinated beans. And because I do a French press, then I just mix the two beans, grind them, put them in, have my cup of joe, just like that. But consider your caffeine intake. That's the key here, because caffeine can make a difference in your stress levels. It can also be hurting your sleep. And you may be saying, I'm the kind of person who can drink a cup of coffee at 8 p.m. and go to bed right after. I would challenge you. It is likely that you don't know how much better sleep you could be getting because your body has so much caffeine built up in it that you're just running on a, a different type of sleep and wake system than your body could really use if it was fully refreshed. There's really just a very small percent of people that aren't affected by caffeine in that way. It does go into our adenosine receptors. It does block the signal of being tired. It does affect sleep, whether you think it does or not. I mean, you may be in that tiny percent population of people, but the majority of you are not. So I would challenge you, even consider giving it up for 7 days. That's how long you need for it to fully eliminate your system and for you to then add it back in and feel the actual effects that it has on your body. And I learned I was very caffeine sensitive and I love coffee, but I will have a half of the caffeine of a cup of coffee on a daily basis. And even then, some days I wake up and I realize, you know what, I'm too on edge to have my coffee this morning. So maybe I'm just going to do some green tea or something like that. But consider that for you. The other thing that I've given up is alcohol. Ever since I had a guest on my podcast, and we'll link in the show notes to the episode, with an alcohol-free coach. She does alcohol-free coaching and talked about the effects of alcohol and how our dopamine system responds to it, just how a lot of the parts of the benefits of alcohol have been debunked over the years. And I've heard many other people say that they believe 20 years from now, many health providers will be looking back and saying alcohol is the new smoking. It's actually probably doing way more damage in our bodies and in our social lives than we could even really begin to fully understand. And so I'm not a big drinker anyway, but I said, you know what? I don't really need it. And especially after I realized that if you drink alcohol while you're eating, that the first thing that your body metabolizes is the alcohol, which means that if I'm eating, pasta with a glass of wine, it's going to be 4 to 6 hours after I eat that meal, because of the glass of wine, that my body actually begins to digest the pasta that I ate. And it just slows down the systems that are happening in your body. And I don't see much benefit of it for me. Again, yes, I will have a glass every once in a while on special occasions, out with friends for very specific circumstances, or just when I want to. I'm not saying this is a never again in my entire life, but I really try and prioritize sleep. And when I prioritize sleep, it makes me have to really look at the alcohol part of it and say, you know what, the majority of the time, it's not worth it. So I've eliminated that for the most part from my diet, and it's absolutely helped me sleep better and helped my stress levels. Another thing that I've added in is cold water baths. There's a lot of evidence and research on these. I've been listening to several podcasts, looking at the research myself. It's pretty much undisputable just how much good it can do for your body in decreasing inflammation and helping deal with stress levels better, and even in increasing the sensitivity of our dopamine receptors in our brains. So why does that matter? It means that we can actually find more pleasure from the things that we're doing, can actually even increase our motivation to an extent, and help us better deal with frustrating issues and stress that are happening throughout our day. For me, when I first get into the cold water bath, there's 10 to 15 seconds of just like, hyperventilating a little bit, like you're trying to catch your breath, but I feel it in my body, just this rush. It's like this rush of adrenaline. And I know this isn't what it is, but I mentally think to myself, like, it's the stress leaving my body. It's the stress leaving my body. And so what the research indicates is that staying in a cold water bath or shower for about 11 minutes a week is really all you need to feel the majority of the effects. And the cold water really only needs to be about 54 degrees, and you can still get great effects from that. So what we do, we didn't buy one of those $5,000 or $10,000, tanks that people are putting in their houses. We fill up our bathtub with water. This is exactly what we do. We put it on the coldest setting that it will go. And so it takes a long time to fill up because sometimes it's just dripping for a little bit. But once that happens, it tends to be around 52 degrees, 53 degrees on its coldest setting. And then we just insert our bodies, like just get in and try to stay in I do it for 3 minutes. I found that's my sweet spot. I'm pretty sensitive to cold. The first time that I did this, I literally put my 2 feet in, tried to sit down, screamed bloody murder, and jumped out like it was a hot fire. My body could not handle it. But over time, I've gotten to where I can definitely get down into it and stay for 3 minutes. But when I get out, if I stay longer than 3 minutes, I tend to just be very cold throughout the rest of the day, like uncomfortably cold throughout the rest of the day. So I found that 3 minutes is my sweet spot. But I've definitely, done 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 7 minutes, and tried different things. So if that's something you're interested in, look up the research, look at the different techniques you can use. You can also use a shower if you don't have a bath. Again, just put it on that coldest setting. End your shower with about a minute and a half just under the cold water, especially being sure to get it on your collarbone and on the back of your neck, tends to be some of the best places to allow the water to hit for it to have its full effects. Fun side note, for men, some of the cold water studies that have been done, it's been seen that in different studies, men tend to also have a weight loss effect by being in cold water and using some cold water therapies. The same is not always true for women, of course. So this is another one of those instances where it's like men can just do one thing and shed 25 pounds, but for women, it can take a little bit more time. That leads me into the next thing that I want to talk about. Cortisol and stress are very sensitive to our bodies and our bodies not being treated the way that they need to be treated. And so if there's relationship stress, if there's health stress, if there's dietary stress, if we're eating too much, if we're not eating the right things, if we're eating a lot of highly processed foods, if we're having issues with a friend or with a husband or wife or someone that we're in close relationship with, that increases our stress levels. And we need to be sensitive to all of these areas. Not so much that we become bogged down with trying to perfect every one of them, because that's impossible, but just sensitive to, if you're going through a particularly distressing relationship issue, then you need to be even more aware of the other things in your life that can lead to an increase in stress, because our bodies don't necessarily differentiate what's causing us stress. They're just seeing stress. They're just seeing increasing cortisol. And so if you're in a particularly difficult relationship issue and also like working out really hard 7 days a week, or maybe training for a marathon, or doing something else that's incredibly taxing on your body, even trying to go through like a huge weight loss, if you're going through relationship stress and trying to shed 50 or 100 pounds or something, or even 10 or 15 pounds, it can be too much for our bodies to handle. We don't want to overstress the bodies or our body in any of those ways. And so be mindful of how you're treating your body. Or maybe if you're going through grief, again, be mindful. That is a stressor. Be mindful of how your body is handling that. And don't try and push your body to do more than it can do, because it can break, and it will break. It will begin to become overtaxed. So be mindful of that. And that leads to something else that I've been doing. I have been trying to be very mindful of my physical training schedule. I am a big fitness advocate. As many of you know, I typically am working out at least 5 times a week. I love weightlifting. I love running. I love yoga. I love all the things. Not all the things. I don't love bar and I hate swimming, but every other thing I can pretty much get behind doing. But I've also had to realize that there's periods of my life where if I'm going through high stress or if I'm doing a Whole30 or following a certain eating plan for a period of time, then I may need to not push myself as hard physically. And I may need to increase the amount of rest and relaxation that I'm getting because we have to balance this out. You can't overstress your body and not allow it to relax. It tilts it too much in the wrong direction. Rest and recovery are real and our bodies need them. Some people have the mindset, I used to have the mindset of, no, I'll push as hard as I can every day because I'll make my body be okay with it. I'll make my body live up to the expectations I have for it. And the only thing that's done is led to further health problems, led to weight gain, led to muscle loss, led to all of the things I didn't want to happen. And I found that when I actually took a step back some and trained a little bit less intensely and focused on recovery and making sure that I was eating enough of the nourishing, healthy foods that my body needed in order for it to fully recover, was when I really hit my stride. So don't undereat, don't overeat, don't over-exercise. There's a lot of aspects of this to consider, but all of those, again, play into our stress levels. In an ideal situation, in an ideal world, we would be adequately nourished and adequately active, and our bodies would work in synchrony with that. So what does that mean? We wouldn't be eating more than we need. We wouldn't be eating less than we need, but we would have the right amount of fuel that we need to be as active as we need or want to be on a daily basis, while also prioritizing the recovery to allow that to happen. What is that for you? It's going to look different for every person. I know what it is for me. I want to be able to do zone 2 training, which is just keeping my heart rate in a certain heart rate range for 45 to 60 minutes 4 times a week. And I want to be doing strength training 4 times a week. Now that those overlap in different ways on certain days, but there are some days I have a full rest day. I lay on the couch and maybe do some light stretching, some walking around the neighborhood, but that's it. I incorporate 1 or 2 days of that and then let the other days fall as they may. Because that's what, for my goals and my priorities, that's what I want to do. What is it for you? That can help you identify how to structure your day, things to think about in order to keep your stress levels in check. I also know for me, moving my body is a part of what helps my stress levels stay low. And in fact, it's absolutely fascinating just looking at the research about how exercise and the things that it does in our bodies acts as an anti-anxiety, antidepressant. Moving our muscles is what releases certain chemicals in our body that can actually have a happiness effect on our bodies. So it is a priority for me. And I believe it should be a priority in some way for everyone. But the extent of which you work out is going to differ based on what your goals are. So think about what your goals are and align your workout routine, your recovery routine, and your eating routine to that. I have 2 more things that I want to share with you. A couple of years ago, research was done on what made certain people more resilient than others. And they found that there's actually a subset of the population that really is more resilient than the normal everyday person. And these people have an area of their brain called the amygdala, which is where our fear response typically originates and goes through, and that gives that fear response that leads to fight or flight and releases that information to the rest of our body. Sources in the amygdala. Actually, as I say that, I'm not 100% sure its source is there, but I know that it has to go through the amygdala in order to get the message to our bodies. But what they found was that the people who had higher levels of resiliency, being able to bounce back after a difficult situation, were people whose amygdalas reset quicker than the general population. That's what resiliency led to. That's why or how they could be more resilient. Now, here's the amazing part. So what they found was that level of resiliency is available to you and to me. And the way that that's available is through something called 4x4 box breathing. So they found that when people implemented this breathing technique I'm about to teach you, they had almost the same levels of resiliency as people who had a genetic predisposition of an amygdala that reset itself very quickly. And here's what that means. about 3 times a day for about 3 minutes, 3 to 5 minutes each time you want to do it. Go through a set of 4x4 box breathing. That means you inhale for a count of 4, you hold it for a count of 4, you exhale for a count of 4, and you hold that at the bottom, exhaled, for a count of 4. So let's do this together. You're going to breathe in 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold 2, 3, 4. Exhale 2, 3, 4. Hold 2, 3, 4. It's about 16 seconds. I probably counted a little quick, but it's about 16 seconds per round. You should be able to get about 4 breaths per minute if you're doing it in that pattern. So doing it for 3 minutes, you're going to be doing 4 times 3, 12 breaths in that minute or in those 3 minutes. And it helps to kind of reset your cognitive system, reset your emotional response to things. And it can help you to decrease your anxiety proactively. So do this proactively, even when you're not feeling stress or anxiety. And it actually helps you to better handle stress and anxiety when they come up in day-to-day life. But of course, it's a tool that you can turn to in the middle of a stressful situation or an anxiety-producing situation. It is an amazing free tool to have in your toolkit, and there's no reason that you shouldn't be using this on a daily basis. Breath. It is amazing what breath does to our bodies. There's a reason that we breathe, but it goes way beyond just getting breath into our lungs. The breath carries different things into our bodies. It's actually the way that we burn fat is through our breath, believe it or not. And it has a lot to do. I mean, our breathing and our ability to breathe deep and for our bodies to use oxygen efficiently actually has a lot to do with longevity as well, how long we're actually going to live. I won't go more into that on this episode, but if you want to dive deeper into like VO2 maxes and different things like that, then it's a lot of fascinating research that we could do there. But breathing, it's important, and we don't breathe deeply enough. Incorporate that 4x4 breathing on your day-to-day basis. And the final one I have is touch, physical touch. Hug your kids, hug your spouse, hug your best friend, hug your parents, hug your siblings. Physical touch is such a stress reducer. I remember when my kids were young and I had just brought them home from India, and there was one day that my son was sick. He was actually sick a whole lot his first year that he was with us. He was very sick his first 2 years of life, which breaks my heart just thinking about how many times he was in and out of the hospital with no one there to hold him. But I remember one morning in particular, my son was sick and he was home, and I was out on a walk before he woke up, and I was listening to a podcast, and the person talking, I cannot remember who it was, but they were talking about the importance of touch and the immune system. And I already knew from psychological research from the past that children in orphanages who were not held, but even if they were given the sustenance they needed, water and food or milk and food, that they would die. They died. It was a terrible experiment that happened back in, I believe, the 1950s. And the children who didn't get the physical touch from a caregiver could not sustain their life, even when they had enough food and water to do so, because we need touch. And actually, in this podcast I was listening to, he further explained how when we are touched, our immune system ends up being bolstered. And I don't understand all of the biological mechanisms that go behind how this happens. Our bodies are fearfully and wonderfully made. But all I know is when I got off of that podcast, got home from my walk, I took a beeline to my son, put him in my lap, and just started stroking his back. And they talked about how there's a cadence that moms typically rub a back. You know what it is. Like, it comes naturally to us. I'm doing it right now. If you're watching on YouTube, I'm doing it right now with our hand. It's just this cadence. Like, there's a certain cadence that you rub a kid's back on when they're sitting on your lap and they're sick. And it's that cadence that actually produces immune fighting systems that occur in the body. It like actually helps children to heal and get better quicker. And it helps your bodies heal. We need to be touched. We're created to be touched. We're created to be in a marriage where we are being sexually active. That leads to its own stress-reducing properties that occur for both men and women. We need to be hugged. We need to snuggle our kids. We need to do things that allow for physical touch to happen, of course, in a consensual and appropriate way. I know everyone understands what I mean, but I think that we forget too often, because we go through busy days on laptops and screens and Zoom meetings and just getting from one thing to the other, that at the end of the day, we forget to just hug our loved ones or hold someone's hand. All of these can produce calming properties in our body, chemicals and systems that happen just when touch happens. So go hug someone you love today. It can help reduce your stress. So what are the key takeaways from today's episode? Be sure to prioritize your sleep. Get a morning routine that helps you have a grounded, calm entry point into your day. Consider your caffeine and alcohol levels and how those might be impacting your stress, especially if you're already going through a stressful situation. Consider cold water, a cold water shower, a cold water bath. You can measure the temperature by just a thermometer. You don't have to have any of this fancy equipment or plunges in order to get the amazing benefits that this can offer. Consider the stress levels in your life and monitor the other things in your life that are causing stress that you do have control over the things that are causing stress you don't have control over. So what I mean by that is, if there's things you don't have control over causing stress, then limit the stressors in your life that you do have control over to decrease your overall stress levels. Implement 4x4 breathing. It is a great way to proactively and reactively reduce stress levels, and go hug someone you love. Share this episode with a friend or family member or loved one who could benefit from it. Please leave a review. It is the best way that you can support this podcast and help it to reach even more people. Until next week, stay strong.